Well, hello, everybody. This is the very first autofocus is still having problems. It's the very first Inklings interview, and today I am joined. It's slightly more focused than I am, apparently. By what should I call you on today's stream? I've titled the video so far Leo McBride.
Well, that's better that than Grand High Pumbaa.
That's fair, I suppose. Welcome to the stream. I can't call you Leo. It's just very strange.
Okay, well, for those who do not know who Leo McBride is,
yes,
it's a nom de plume. It's a pen name for Stephen Hunt, and
that's you.
That's me. That's me. And the reason that I use a nom de plume, perhaps to quickly explain, is because for anybody who reads science fiction, fantasy, there's already a splendid author already by the name of Stephen Hunt. So, so hence I had to come up with a whole new identity, and Leo McBride it is. And today I'm joined by my little minion, Charlotte.
Hello, Charlotte.
I would love to say that she's the minion and that not me, but
the truth will out.
So yes, so that perhaps explains it. So you can now proceed by calling me Steve.
Yes, that feels much easier for me. Well, welcome, Steve and Charlotte. Wow, every time I talk, it just goes out of focus. This is something I'm going to have to fix for future attempts at this. Yeah, exactly. But I think the first thing we need to talk about is what is Inklings Press and how did it start? And I wasn't actually there for the start of it. So, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about how Inklings Press got started and why it exists?
Well, once upon a time, we got very drunk. And
a good start.
A great deal of the credit for Inklings Press, I would say, has to go to Ricardo Victoria, who, for those who followed Inklings Press, he's in tons and tons of the books already. So he really was a big driving force at the start, where it was just trying to get friends together who had done some writing, wanted to do some writing, wanted to do more with their writing, and start up a writing group. And from that, there was, involvement from plenty of others, such as Brent, if you take a look back at our first book, various of the people from that book, who are still in the original group that we started up on Facebook called the Inklings. Right. Somewhere along the way, we sort of like looked at each other and said, we could publish some of these. We could do something with these. And so Inklings Press became a thing.
Right.
And it was a team effort. Everybody involved. There were people involved with writing. There were people involved with reading one another's stories. There were people involved with editing, doing graphic design, all that kind of thing. So really, it was kind of turning the writing group into a publishing group.
Right. And of course, that led to, if I can just pull it out. Well, this is, of course, the compilation of the first two Kindle books. Hey, which became the paperback Tales from the Tower.
Yes, so the first one was Tales from the Tower, which was a collection of 5 fantasy short stories. That was our first little dip of our toe into the world of publishing. It was a test or experiment, really.
Sure.
And then from that, it went well enough that we thought, we thought we'd do it again. Yes. And so we did Tales from the Mists, which was the horror anthology, just in time for Halloween that year. And again, that was 5 more stories. So down the line, after we sort of like moved from just publishing ebooks, which was just what we were doing at the time, thanks to going through Amazon, when we decided to turn those, into a book, a physical book, we decided for the first one that each of those was probably too thin individually to sell as a physical book. So we merged the two into the first year of Inklings Press, which was Tales from the Tower.
Tales from the Tower, yeah.
And by that stage, you came in on the third book.
Yes, he says, reaching for it on his stack of books beside him. I can't even see it. Oh, no, it's on the top. Tales from the Universe was the first book that I joined in. I was... there's one as well. I've been a little bit involved peripherally with Tales from the Tavern, at least giving feedback on some of the stories. And I felt that, out of focus as I am, perhaps I should put my money where my mouth is and put a story into the next anthology. And that's why I ended up submitting for Tales. Oh, look at this. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, I really need to fix that for the next time I do one of these. But that's where I come into the Inkling story, I guess. And we are now we're well into it now. It's been a few years now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's what, 3 years. So we've done like 7 books now, and I think we've learned lessons as we've gone along. I think our design has improved. I think our willingness to listen to criticism has improved. Because we're writers, so we craft these little, what we think are gems and wonderful little delights that we can share with the world.
Indeed.
And then we present them to our fellow writers, and they say, "Eh."
I've come to terms with the idea that whatever ending that I've come up for one of my stories, Brent will have a better idea for it.
But I think initially, when I'm sure I'm generalizing it. It's not universal, but initially, when you're tiptoeing
Tales from the Universal,
that would have worked so well if it was in focus. I think initially, when you're tiptoeing into doing some writing and such, like, I think it's probably a little natural to feel a bit defensive when people say, "Well, I quite like the story, but..."
yes, of course.
Then you come to realize that helps you, and that you can actually sharpen your story, that you can make it better.
And that's really fundamentally part of the Inklings ethos, I guess, now. Yeah. It's not just about finding a story, it's about helping those writers whose stories we like find the best version of that story as well.
It's one of the bits I really like when a writer gets involved who we've not dealt with previously. And when we put forward a couple of suggestions for tweaks to the story, and they go, "Actually, yeah, I didn't like that intro anyway, and so that gives me a much better motive to go back and change the intro up."
Yes,
I think that's the good thing about what we've done. That it's not just being, as it started out, a whole bunch of friends. It's also taking that to new writers that we're getting involved with as well.
We've had some people who are in the independent science fiction fantasy world, kind of names by now, really.
Yes. Well, strictly speaking, I suppose the latest book. Not that I want to jump ahead to
the latest book
in front of the screen.
These ones, yes.
Yeah. But if we look on the back of that, we've got Daniel Benson, Sidewise Award winner. Much as I'm to name him, Brent Harris, double Sidewise Award nominee, and probably watching this right now, shaking his fist at the screen. There's Gideon Marcus, who was at Worldcon on various panels, was up there shortlisted for one of the categories and things like that. And that's not short selling anybody else as well. There's lots of other people who, if you mention names to people, they go, "Oh, yeah, so it's got a story in by, say, Bonnie Milani," and people know her from all kinds of places. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's also good that we still have people coming through who are still perhaps not got many story credits to them.
No, absolutely. It is part of what Inklings is about, after all. It's about providing a platform for new writers as well as getting out there for the names, as I say.
And I think one of the other lessons we've learned, and we're still learning, I think
I should say so.
Goodness knows, from this last book, we sat down afterwards and went, right, how can we do this better next time as well? But I think, one of the things that perhaps because the first 2 went so quickly and smoothly, we were like, yeah, okay, we can do more of these. This will be straightforward. This will be all right.
We did have a very ambitious publishing schedule in the sort of middle of it all.
Yes, which I'd like to get back to at some point.
But yeah, I know, I would too.
But I think also we sort of like neglected perhaps to consider that the first two books were only 5 stories each.
Yeah.
Whereas this latest one is 11 stories. So more than twice the work of a single one of those books. So I think, yeah, I think growing each time we do a book is how we've been going along. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to tease a tease in a moment. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about some of your stories. Just because, you know, I'm interviewing you. That's the central conceit of what's going on here. I mean, you know, you're the one in focus at the end of the day. And we're focusing on you. Yes, absolutely. It's all part of the plan, really. It's keeping us on brand.
Oh dear. Hang on. We may have a slight interruption here. If you're following live, this is where you perhaps go and get yourself a little glass of water, a cup of tea. Charlotte will be drinking her milk.
Fair enough.
So, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that you were saying earlier that we all have different roles within the production of an Inklings book. And one of the things that you do that most people probably aren't aware of is that you are a kind of final editor. Ooh, I've knocked the camera. For a lot of, ooh, blimey, that's really bad. Don't do that. I'm learning new things about live streaming all the time, and one of them is stay in focus, and the other is don't mess with the camera in the middle of a stream. That's, yeah. Anyway, so you are the primary editor of that, and the final polish of the stories comes from mostly punctuation and picking up things like that, I guess for the most part. But from my point of view, one of the high points of every anthology is getting your story to read. And I have to say, well, it is true. But, you've had some of the stories that you put into the books have been particularly spectacular. Do you have a favorite? I mean, I know it's like choosing between.
Oh gosh, tough question.
Well, that's what we're here for.
Yes, well, as much as anything, because again, like many a writer, I am often consumed with the whole imposter syndrome thing and think that I'm just bluffing everybody by sneaking my stories in there when nobody's looking.
Trust me or not, I am. Most of the time, I don't even look like a person.
I knew it. Tough to say. I guess one. If there's one that keeps coming back to me, then probably it would be. Yes, hello. It would probably be the one from. What was actually probably the least successful of our books in terms of sales and such like. Not in terms of reviewing and everything like that. It still did very well. But I did enjoy the story from Tales of Wonder. If that's in any kind of focus. Which was The Last Sorcerer. Which it came about from a slightly different writing process for me, in that when I sat down to write it, all I had in my head was the title of the story, which often comes way later, way down the road later. After many, many drinks later, I finally stumble upon a title. But also, at the same time as I had at the same time as I had the title, I also had the very last words of the story.
Right, yeah.
Which I don't want to spoil for people, obviously.
Of course, no. I wouldn't encourage it.
I'd say, by golly, that was fabulous, particularly that Leo McBride thing. But because I sort of like knew where I was going to get to, but didn't entirely know where I was starting out, the thing really took form as I wrote. Madam. Sorry about this.
No, it's all right.
There. So it really took shape as I wrote that one. And it kind of like sprang almost full formed as I wrote the twist, the characters, the development of the characters, how to sort of like connect the characters to the reader, even though it's set in sort of like because the book itself is a science fantasy collection.
Yes.
So it is science fiction and fantasy. So mine is set in sort of like a slightly future Britain where magic is a thing, but magic users are being hunted. And so to connect the reader to that world a little, you sort of like, humanize the characters, have things in common with what the reader might have in common. So at one point, for example, they're driving along the country roads of England, listening to Frank Sinatra on their CD player and singing along. And I enjoyed that process of finding out who these characters were as I wrote it.
Yeah.
Whereas quite often with a story, I've got a bit more of the beginning structure and build towards the end. This was the other way around, that I had the end and then I had to figure out how to get there.
Okay. I have to say, it is probably my favorite of your stories. My other favorite, I guess, pull my books out, is in Tales from the Underground. And it's a stupid reason, I guess, for particularly enjoying a story, but I just love the title. It's ridiculous. I like the story. I like all your stories. As I said, one of the high points for every anthology for me is seeing what Steve's come up with this time. But in Tales from the Underground, which was actually a bit of a departure for the group, actually, I think, because it's not themed around a genre like the rest of the books were.
Well, strictly speaking, I think we got mugged. I think the writers from previous anthologies just collectively said, we're darn well writing about the underground. And we went, well, okay. And it got some darn good entries.
And I guess we caved.
Yes, good, well played.
You see, that's why I'm here, being out focused on telling bad jokes. So my favourite thing about your book, your story in Tales from the Underground, it's a good story, and don't get me wrong, I'm not belittling it anyway, but the title is, and I'm having to read this, is Professor, I can't even read it, teeth in, Professor Algernon Whitlock's Exotic and Fabulous Grand Tour of the Underworld. Now, is that one where the title came first? Or variations on the title, I guess?
The title was early, very early. But I'd been kicking around the idea of this underworld exploration in a slightly steampunky, Victoriana kind of feel to it. The title really kicked it on.
Sure.
So for anybody who's following this, that's Rob's favorite bit. It's all downhill from there. But it was
not what I meant, and you know.
I know. But what that led me to do was to go and research like various cave systems underground and such like.
Yes.
But part of it also came from remembrances of cave explorations in Ireland and such. So when on holiday with family over in Ireland, going visiting family and such like. For example, there's the Islewee caves in Ireland, which is like an old slate mine and everything like that. And you get to go underground. They take you like a mile underground, and then they turn the lights off.
Right.
And there's not a trace, not a hint. And there's the total, absolute sense of darkness that you are completely enveloped in.
Yeah.
And so remembrances of that kind of thing, along with researching different types of cave systems and incorporating some of those into the story. For example, in that story, there's a folly which has been built by some other individual. I shan't go too far into it with the story and stuff like that. But they build an organ inside a cave, which uses the natural stalagmites and stalactites and the sound system of the cave to produce the notes. So they have little hammers that strike the stalagmites to produce certain notes. And that's based on a real thing.
Okay.
So both of that, and there's also like a crystal section of the cave, which has an intense heat and is a struggle for the characters to get through. And that's, again, based upon a real cave system. This is that one in Mexico. So I cherry-picked various bits of the underworld for the Grand Tour.
I mean, you're joking, of course, about me and my obsession with just the title. I think one of the great things, actually, I loved about your story for this one, is that we've got some brilliant stories in Tales. It is. I'm very proud, because I was one of the sort of primary story selectors for Underground. I'm very proud of the stories we ended up with in that book. But we've got a lot of mines, a lot of populated caves, and one of the things that I thought really kind of, and it's I don't know whether people really think about how anthologies are put together, but we have a method, and the final book in the final story in the book, and that's what Steve's is in Tales from the Underground, is one of the prestige places, and it was put there for me because it really rounded off what was missing from the anthology. Really about a story about being underground. We have lots of stories about monsters and fairies and ghosts and time travel and all sorts of great stuff in Tales from the Underground. But this story, your story, is really very much about the feeling, the sense of being underground, and I thought that was a fabulous part of it.
Also, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I also thought it quite worked in that
way.
Well, just it's not. It won't be a spoiler, but also part of the end of the story has the characters emerging back into the light, back into the daytime, and coming out of the cave.
Yeah.
And that kind of like was a nice note to tie it off on. You know, yes. We've been on the underground journey, and now we're out again, and here we are back on the surface. Yeah. But I will also throw a shout in there for Claire Buss for taking a splendid twist on Underground by making it about the underground as in a furtive resistance movement.
I think Underground Scratchings, isn't it, Claire's story? I think, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a palate cleanser in the middle of the book. I think it's a very fresh story.
Yes, and when you've sort of like got everybody's expectations built up for, okay, we're going to be in a cave again, suddenly she throws in this quite delightful twist on it all, and I thought that was nice. That was clever.
Yeah. Now, just something that I thought I might. We're kind of winding up here. There are two or three things I want to do left on the little chat. One thing that I thought might be fun as a thing to introduce on these on a regular basis is to have a little, since it is about writing and stories, we should have some sort of writing story challenge within the interview.
Okay.
So I'm just going to give you a character and an objective, and I want like a 2 or 3 sentence pitch about what a story with that character and that objective might be. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions first. So it'll be the last thing that you answer. So give you a little bit of time to think about it. So from our grey box of random people, I'm just verifying this is a random selection process.
This is like Writers Against Humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Writers Against. I like that. We could use that. Okay. A very simple one here. I don't know if you can see that, but we've got a story about a wizard.
Okay.
And the wizard is I've got some rather strange objectives in here. Some of them are very fancy, obvious, easy ones, and others are just a bit odd. I'm hoping for an odd one, if I'm honest, having had an easy wizard. What have we got here? Oh, that's too boring. Well, there's good stories in that. But let's. Okay, we've got a wizard who's trying to find love. There we go.
Okay.
But anyway,
hang on. Lift that one back up because the focus was totally off and nobody will be able to prove it.
Of course, I've got to talk for it to actually pay attention to me, and as soon as I do that, find love. There we go. But anyway, just a couple of things I want to talk about before I ask you for your 2 or 3 sentence pitch about a wizard looking for love. Firstly, you actually, as well as being a writer in the Inklings world, you also, in your day job, also have quite a lot of writing, or certainly editing anyway. Why choose a hobby so close to what you do the rest of the time?
Because you all made me.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Okay, serious answer. Well, I've written all the time. When I was a kid, like 14 years old, thereabouts, I like many a furtive scribbler. I joined a local writers group.
Yeah.
Which met down at the local library, and the writers there huddled together and shared their stories of doom about how it was impossible to make a living out of writing. So they often had guests who would come along to speak at the library. And one time we had Philippa Gregory came down to talk, and she had a background in journalism or adjacent to journalism and such like, and we chatted after her talk and such like, and I was sort of like saying, well, how do you make a living out of such things? And she said, well, journalism's a pretty good way to go, because you get used to deadlines, you get used to having to write even though perhaps the muse isn't there, because you can't turn around to a news editor and say, sorry, the whim just isn't with me to finish that story today. And it's a practical way of sort of like getting your head down and making a career and such things before perhaps your writing has bloomed. So I'd already been leaning that way a little bit anyway, so that tilted a bit further along that path. And then I went into journalism, and a lot of my creative kind of impetus and such like over the years went into things like role-playing games and such like. For anybody watching, both me and Rob are shameless geeks. Yes,
yeah, it is true.
And so for like 30 years, I was running role-playing games and such like, and perhaps at one point, I worked my way through journalism in various jobs in England. I left my previous job in England and applied for a job in the Bahamas, where I now am.
As you are.
Happy Bahamas. And
you do win on that, of course, because you went to the Bahamas. I only got as far as Finland. So
I certainly chose warmer.
Yes.
Surprisingly enough, in the Bahamas, where there are beautiful beaches galore, and the landscape is fabulous, and the sky's dripping with blue, not many people want to sit indoors and play D&D. So my creative urges just sort of like hopped a rail over into writing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. The other thing I wanted to talk very briefly about is about Altered Instinct, which is, well, would you call it your blog, or is it's a bit more than that, really, isn't it?
It is my blog, but I am delighted to host other people there from time to time. And it's like many things in the first year of this little baby, who's fast asleep here now, by the way, completely gone. In the first year of this little one, that keeping up with the blog has been a challenge at times. Yes. So blog posts have been a little more sporadic. But it serves as a handy resource for being able to get some of my stories out there, some other people's stories out there. And one of the real treats with it is that people have approached me and asked to have some of their stories on the blog. Like there's a writer from Canada by the name of DM Gillis who's got 3 stories, I think, on there. And they're fabulous. He's a great little writer. I really like his stuff. But he just came to me out of nowhere and asked if he could feature, and I was honored to be able to host such things. Altered Instinct is going through a little bit of a tweak at the minute, in that...
Tell me more.
Well, in the next couple of weeks, it's going to become, as well as a blog, it's going to become a magazine. Now, that's going to be initially I'm aiming it at being a quarterly magazine, and it's going to be a paid outlet for writers. So the initial issue has its lead story already lined up and booked in from the writing team of E.M. Swifthook and Jane Jago. And that's a story set within their Di and Julia universe. They have an alternate history world where the Roman Empire never faded. And within that, they set in a modern Britain stories of this detective duo, Di and Julia, each coming from wholly different worlds, but yet pushed together by their requirement to be able to, well, solve crimes, find out what's going wrong, work out where things are.
Solving crimes is important.
Indeed. And as well as that, there's going to be various pieces from different writers as well. I'm hoping for one from a young chap by the name of Rob Edwards, for example.
Who?
There'll be it's going to be a way of getting stories. Some of the stories are going to be new. Some of the stories are going to be ones that are already on the blog, in order to be able to repurpose them to get them out to perhaps a different audience. Yeah. As well as that, I'm commissioning some articles from various writers, about which I can't reveal too much just yet because they're not quite finalized, but that should hopefully resolve in the next couple of weeks. And as well as that, one of the other things with it is that because I now live in the Bahamas, I want to try and get more involvement from people in the local community, people who are writers and artists here. So there's an artist who's creating, well, I've given him free license to create what he wants. I didn't want to stifle him too much, but I hinted towards perhaps an ongoing comic each issue. But what he comes up with, I shall be delighted to see, and he's a local chap. And there's another couple of writers I'm trying to get involved locally as well, which is, as much as anything, a conscious decision to try and broaden the range of people involved, because how to put it? For example, those of us who are at the core of Inklings Press, the four of us are all blokes, and I want to make I want to broaden the involvement to have more women involved and more people of color involved and such like. Ricardo's obviously from a Latino background, a Mexican background, but I'd like to spread that range because, you know, those opportunities, if we've got the chance to present those opportunities, I think we should.
Yeah, of course, that makes sense.
So that's one of the things that I want to try and do more with the magazine version of the blog and try and get more involvement that way. But stay tuned, as they say. And
I did mention earlier that I was going to do an out of focus tease about Inklings Press, and we're not going to say what exactly, but there is something in the magazine about Inklings, right? That's the plan.
Indeed, yes. We've just got the latest collection out, which, as ever, as soon as the previous collection is done, thoughts turn to, ooh, what's next? And so the magazine will include something teasing what's next and perhaps opening submissions for what will be the next book.
Your ideas intrigue me.
Yeah, I think that's a good way for us to kick off opening up what our next anthology will be, which, you know, we shall leave those details a little longer for revealing.
And of course, we will announce that. We will announce that outside of your magazine as well.
Oh, yes.
But the magazine gets first bite of that particular apple. Well, I think that probably winds up where we wanted to get, where I wanted to get to with this first interview. I clearly have some technical issues to work out, but generally I think that was a rather fun little exercise. So,
okay, thank you for having me and for having the young sleeping lady.
Sleeping Charlotte. And do you have, and we can cut this out if you haven't, but do you have a short pitch about the story that you would write about a wizard looking for love?
Wizard looking for love. A pitch, not a story, right, Hill.
Yeah, I'm not expecting like 600 words off the top of your head at this point.
In which case, there's there's the loneliest man in the loneliest tower, and all he wants to do is to go from nightclub to nightclub looking for a chance to put a spell on you.
Oh, you see, that is why, sir, you are a writer. Well, thank you very much, Stephen Hunt, aka Liam McBride, aka Inklings Guru Guy. It's been a lot of fun talking to you, and I hope the people who have, I hope somebody watched it and have enjoyed it as well. Thanks very much for your time.
Go buy the books.
Sorry, God, I'm really, this marketing thing does not come naturally to me. Go and buy the book. The latest one, as we talked about, is Tales from Alternate Earths Volume 2. It has stories from 2 Sidewise nominated and 1 winner in the book. It's got a story from me. It's got a story from Steve. It's got a story from well, lots of people have got stories in there as well. Bonnie Milano and a few others as well. But it's very good, and it should all go to. And there are 6 other books. If alternate history is not your thing, we have anthologies: Tales of Wonder for science fantasy, Tales from the Underground for stories about caves and being underground, science fiction, Tales from the Universe, Tales from the Tavern is about a fantasy and horror anthology. So we've got something for everybody, really.
And one last thing, if I might.
Of course.
For anybody viewing, whatever you're reading, if you're enjoying it, go leave a review. The author will love you.
Yes, indeed. Reviews. We love reviews. We always read reviews. And if you ever wonder whether the writers ever see a review you've written, I can assure you, at least for Inklings Press anthologies, we share those around quite vehemently. And
if it's a negative review, we share those too, and we don't swear at all about them. Never,
ever.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks very much, Steve. Cheers.
Bye for now.
Bye.